The Price of Peace. A story of vengeance and vindication. Get ready for a story that will leave you breathless. If you love drama, intrigue, and life's unexpected twists, be sure to hit like on this video and subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss how our characters' destinies unfold. What happens when the woman you cast aside, the one you called simple, unambitious, and a burden holding you back, lands in a life you could only dream of? Julian Vance believed he had it all. A luxury office, a 7-figure salary, and a dazzling new trophy wife. He discarded his college sweetheart, Clara Bellwether, convinced he had upgraded in every conceivable way. He would see her one last time at a corporate event he considered the pinnacle of his success, only to discover that the quiet, unassuming man on her arm wasn't just her new partner. He was the sole owner of the entire company to which Julian had dedicated his life, and vengeance was about to be served. Not hot and loud, but cold, silent, and absolutely devastating. This is the story of how a man who thought he'd reached the summit was pushed from the peak by the ghost of a life he so carelessly abandoned. Like this video now. If you're ready for an unforgettable journey, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss another powerful story. And tell us in the comments what part of the world you're watching us from. Chapter 1. The Breaking Point. The air in the minimalist, multi-million-dollar New York apartment felt thin and sterile, much like the conversation. Julian Vance adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke shirt, the impeccable fabric in stark contrast to the frayed edges of his 14-year relationship with Clara. "It's just not working anymore, Clara," he said, his voice laced with a rehearsed, almost bored finality. He avoided looking into her eyes, observing instead the floor-to-ceiling window as the glittering expanse of New York stretched out below. This view, this apartment, this life, he had earned it. And Clara, in her faded jeans and a simple gray t-shirt, no longer fit the picture. Clara clutched a mug of lukewarm tea, her knuckles white. Her heart was a cold, heavy stone in her chest. 14 years, Julian. That's not something you simply decide isn't working, like a faulty appliance. "Don't be dramatic," he sneered, finally turning to face her. His gaze swept over her, and she could feel him cataloging her perceived flaws. The lack of makeup, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, the absence of designer labels. "We want different things. I have goals, ambition. I'm about to be named Senior Managing Director at Vantage Capital Group. I need a partner who complements that, someone who thrives in that world." The unspoken words hung in the air between them. Someone who isn't you. Clara had been a rising star in the art history world, but as Julian's career in finance began its meteoric ascent, the demands grew. She had voluntarily stepped back, postponing her own ambitions to support his. "So all this time," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "the dinners I hosted for your clients, the weekends I spent alone while you traveled, the career I gave up, that was me holding you back. We were kids when we met," he said dismissively, waving a hand as if batting away an annoying fly. "We've grown apart. My life is moving in a certain direction, and yours, well, it's static. You're comfortable. You lack drive. Clara, you're happy with your books and your quiet life. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's not enough for me." That was the deepest cut. He had taken her contentment, the peace she'd cultivated in the small spaces he allowed her, and turned it into a character flaw. The divorce was a brutal, efficient affair. Julian was generous, he told everyone. He let her keep the modest savings account they'd started, and half the equity from the sale of their first house. A pittance compared to the fortune he'd amassed. The apartment, the art collection she had curated, were all his. On the final day, As Clara packed her last few belongings into cardboard boxes, Julian walked in with Serafina, a woman who looked like she'd been assembled in a lab for the specific purpose of being a billionaire's girlfriend. Serafina was all blonde hair, impossible teeth, and a dress that cost more than Clara's first car. "Julian, darling," Serafina purred, ignoring Clara completely. "Are you sure you want to let this painting go? The colors are a bit muted." Julian laughed, a sound that made Clara's stomach clench. "Whatever you want, babe. We can redecorate the whole place, a completely new start." Clara stood still, a box of books in her arms. She looked at Julian and saw a complete stranger. The warmth in his eyes had been replaced by a cold, metallic glint. She didn't say a word. She simply turned, walked out of the apartment, and didn't look back. Her new apartment was small, in a Boston neighborhood with more character than glamour. The first few months were a quiet blend of grief. The silence was the loudest thing. No last-minute client dinners to prepare, no suits to pick up from the dry cleaner, no ego to manage. There was just her, on a rainy Tuesday, staring at the blank walls of her apartment. A spark ignited. She deserved more than this silent sadness. She deserved to be surrounded by beauty, the kind she understood. She took Julian's generous settlement and invested in herself. She started a small, one-woman art consultancy business from her dining room table. She called it Bellwether Curatorial. Every success, no matter how small, was a brick laid in the foundation of her new life. She didn't follow Julian's life, but it was impossible to avoid it. He was a regular feature in the society pages, always photographed with Serafina. Financial magnate Julian Vance and socialite Serafina dazzle at the opera gala. But as she hung the final piece of art in a client's home, a vibrant abstract that brought the whole room to life, she felt a satisfaction no society photo could ever capture. She was building something real, something her own. And she was just getting started. Interactive. Question: do you think Clara regretted giving up her career for Julian? Or do you think that relinquishment was the trigger for her true freedom? Leave your opinion in the comments below. Chapter 2. The silent ascent. Elias Thorne moved through the world like a ghost. He was one of the few people on the planet whose wealth was so vast, it afforded him the one luxury no one else could buy: true anonymity. His holdings spanned aviation, tech incubators, vast tracts of real estate, and a portfolio of private equity firms, one of which was a mid-performing company he barely thought about, Vantage Capital Group. His name wasn't on any building. He didn't grant interviews. His holding company, Thorne Global, was a name whispered at the highest echelons of finance. His passion was art. He collected because it was the one thing that quieted the noise of his life. He learned about Clara Bellwether through a trusted source, the director of a major museum, for whom Elias was a significant, albeit anonymous, donor. "There's a woman," the director had said. "Clara Bellwether. She was brilliant, one of my best students. Disappeared for a marriage, but she's back. She has the eye. She doesn't just see a picture. She sees the soul behind it. She finds stories, not just assets." The word stories piqued Elias's interest. He was tired of dealers who only talked about auction records. The first time Clara met Elias was at a small cafe, halfway between her apartment and his discreet office. She expected a pompous, aged magnate. The man who stood up to greet her was the opposite. In his mid-40s with kind, intelligent eyes. He wore a simple cashmere sweater and dark jeans. There was an aura of stillness about him, a stark contrast to Julian's frantic energy. "Ms. Bellwether, I'm Elias Thorne. Thank you for meeting with me. Please call me Clara." Their conversation wasn't about money. He wanted to know what she was passionate about. She found herself talking for an hour with an enthusiasm she hadn't felt in years. She talked about the Spanish masters, the quiet dignity of a Sorolla. He listened, truly listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't check his phone. "I'm looking for a piece," he said. "Something for my personal study. It's a quiet room. I want the art to reflect that. Not silence, but quiet contemplation. Can you help me find that?" Their relationship unfolded through gallery visits and long conversations over coffee. He was a puzzle she enjoyed solving slowly. He was evidently a man of immense resources, but there was no ostentation. His watch was elegant, but not flashy. He spoke of business trips to Singapore and Zurich as casually as Julian spoke of a weekend on the coast. He never mentioned his company or his position. She opened up to him. She told him about her abandoned academic career, the slow erosion of her confidence during her marriage, and the quiet joy she was finding in rebuilding her life. "He told me I lacked drive," she confessed one afternoon. "He saw my contentment as a weakness." Elias was silent for a moment. "Contentment is not the opposite of drive," he finally said, his voice soft. "It's the fuel. A man who needs constant chaos to feel alive is a man running from himself. A person who can find peace in a quiet room, that's a person who has already won." His words enveloped her. For the first time, she saw her own nature not as a disadvantage, but as a strength. One evening, he invited her to dinner at his home. It was a breathtaking penthouse, occupying the entire top floor of a historic building. The space was a masterpiece of understated luxury. There was a small Goya, a sketch by Dali, a stunning tapis. "This is extraordinary, Elias," she whispered, filled with awe. "It's just my home," he said. "It's where I come to be quiet." It was in that moment, with the taste of fine wine on her lips and the comfortable silence between them, that Clara realized she was falling in love. It wasn't the frantic passion of her youth with Julian. It was a slow, deep current, a feeling of coming home. She began managing his entire collection on a budget that made her giddy. His instructions were always the same. Buy what is important, Clara. Buy the stories that need to be told. One night, cuddled on the sofa, Elias was reviewing documents on a tablet. "Just a routine third-quarter review for one of our acquisitions," he murmured. "A private equity firm we bought a few years back. They're a bit aggressive for my taste, but they deliver good numbers. Their board is pushing for a big M&A deal. Their chief executive is eager. A real shark, apparently." "What's the firm called?" "Vantage Capital Group," he said. The name hit her like a physical impact. Vantage Capital, Julian's company. The company for which she had sacrificed her marriage. The company where he was a shark. She looked at Elias's profile, this kind, quiet man, who was now her whole world. He spoke of Julian's firm as a minor asset, a line item on a balance sheet. He swiped the screen back. A chain of emails popped up. She saw the name Julian Vance in the to field of a memo. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, dizzying clarity. Elias was not just rich. He was not just successful. He was Julian's boss. Not just his boss, but the ultimate authority. The unseen hand. The god in the machine. The universe, it seemed, had a perverse sense of humor. All this time, Julian had been climbing a ladder, fighting to reach the top, desperate for the approval of a man he'd never met. And that man was now falling asleep on the sofa, his head in the lap of the woman Julian had thrown away. She felt a strange, chilling calm. The drama he had written for their lives, where he was the conquering hero, and she, the forgotten prologue, was about to take a turn he could never have imagined. And the curtain was about to rise. If this twist of fate has shocked you, leave a heart in the comments. Do you think Clara should have told Elias about her past with Julian sooner? Share your opinion with us. Chapter 3. The Grand Entrance. Julian Vance felt invincible. He was on the verge of the deal that would cement his legacy at Vantage Capital. For 6 months, he had been spearheading the hostile takeover of a small, but brilliant biotech firm called Biogenetics. It was a ruthless, aggressive campaign. This was the deal that would finally earn him the title of Senior Managing Director and the respect he craved. His life with Serafina was exactly as he'd designed it. Serafina was the perfect accessory, beautiful and vacuous. Yet sometimes, in the dark of night, a pang of unease would creep in. He remembered a time when conversation meant debating art or philosophy with Clara until 2 a.m., their eyes alight with passion. He banished the thought. This was the better life. One evening, he and Serafina were dining at the Mirror, a 3-Michelin star restaurant. He was celebrating a preliminary victory. "To us," he said, raising his glass of aged Bordeaux. "And to my new kingdom." Serafina giggled, clinking her glass against his. "I saw the most divine diamond bracelet at Cartier, darling. It would look perfect with my dress for the Vantage Gala." Julian barely heard her. His eyes had drifted across the opulent dining room and frozen. There, at a secluded table, was Clara. But she wasn't the Clara he remembered. The weary, defeated woman from the apartment was gone. This Clara was radiant. She wore an emerald green silk dress, simple yet exquisitely cut, that highlighted the warmth of her skin. She was laughing, a genuine, uninhibited sound that seemed to fill the space around her. And the man she was with, Julian squinted. He didn't recognize him. He wore an understated, expensive suit. His attention was focused solely on Clara. There was an intimacy between them that spoke of something deep and real. Julian felt a hot, unfamiliar pang of jealousy. It was absurd. He had Serafina. He had everything. So why did the sight of his static ex-wife, looking so vibrantly happy, feel like a personal insult? "Who is that?" Serafina asked, following his gaze. "Is that your ex? God, what is she wearing?" "She's nobody," Julian snapped, turning his attention back to his plate. But his appetite had vanished. He watched the man place a hand over Clara's, his touch soft and proprietary. He saw the way Clara looked at him, with an adoration she had once reserved only for Julian. He told himself it didn't matter. She was probably dating some boring professor. The Vantage Capital Group annual gala was the event of the season in the financial world. It was a night of pure self-congratulation, and for Julian, it was his coronation. "This is it, Serafina," he said, adjusting his bow tie in the mirror of their penthouse. "Tonight, everyone will see who runs this city." Clara had initially declined Elias's invitation to the gala. Elias had smiled. "I know, and I promise we'll only stay an hour, but this one is unavoidable. The board has been begging me to make an appearance for years. And," he added, his eyes twinkling, "they're giving out a Dealmaker of the Year award, and I am expected to present it. I need my beautiful partner there to support me." She relented, a knot of dread and anticipation forming in her stomach. Vantage Capital. Dealmaker of the Year. It had to be Julian. The universe wasn't just humorous. It was a cruel and brilliant playwright. She chose her dress carefully. It was a stunning midnight blue silk gown, elegant and powerful. As she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. This was not Julian's mousy ex-wife. This was a woman who knew her own worth, a woman who stood beside one of the most powerful men in the world. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel. Julian was at the entrance, basking in the congratulations of his colleagues. "A masterpiece, Vance," boomed his direct boss, Robert Miles, slapping him on the back. "The biogenetics acquisition will be studied for years. The man at Thorn Global will be very pleased." Julian preened. "Just doing my job, Robert." It was then that a silence fell over the room. Heads turned toward the grand entrance. Elias Thorn had arrived. He moved with the same quiet grace, but in this context, it magnified into an aura of immense power. The crowd parted for him, as if by an invisible force, and on his arm, looking serene and impossibly beautiful, was Clara. Julian's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound was lost in the collective gasp of the room. He stared. His mind refused to process what his eyes saw. It was like watching two worlds collide, two narratives that should never have crossed paths. Clara, with the man from the restaurant, and the entire room was looking at him, not with admiration, but with mounting horrified astonishment. The man who had been a ghost, a legend, the ultimate source of power in their world, was here. And his ex-wife was on his arm. "Julian, what is going on? Who is that man?" Serafina asked, her grip on his arm tightening. "Mr. Thorne," Robert Miles said, moving forward, his face a comical mask of reverence and shock. "We are profoundly honored by your presence, Mr. Thorne." The name echoed in Julian's skull. Thorne Global, the parent company, the owner. His blood ran cold. The man his ex-wife looked at with such love. He wasn't just an anonymous suitor. He was the owner of everything. He owned Vantage. He owned Julian. Clara's eyes, calm and steady, met his across the room. There was no malice in them, no triumph, just a quiet, devastating understanding. In that single look, Julian Vance's entire world collapsed. Elias, apparently oblivious to the shockwave he'd created, nodded politely to the Vantage CEO. "Robert, an excellent event." His voice was easily audible in the silenced room. His eyes, however, were on Clara. "I believe you know my partner, Clara Bellwether." Robert Miles's head whipped toward Clara. His face was a comical mask of confusion and panic. "Clara! Yes, of course. How wonderful to see you," he stammered, his servile smile trembling. The Dealmaker of the Year award ceremony was a public execution. Julian, who had been anticipating this moment for months, had to walk from his table to the stage on legs that felt like lead. Elias received the heavy crystal award. He walked to the podium, his presence commanding the absolute attention of every person in the room. "Good evening," Elias began, his voice quiet and measured. "Vantage Capital has had a profitable year, and a key part of that has been the aggressive M&A strategy led by mentor Julian Vance." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. "The acquisition of biogenetics in particular has been noted for its tenacity," Elias continued, choosing the word with surgical precision. "It was a campaign that valued victory above all else. It has, undoubtedly, secured an important asset for the portfolio." Julian felt a faint glimmer of hope. Maybe this would be okay. Perhaps Thorne was a pragmatist. "However," Elias said, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly, "at Thorne Global, we believe that how one wins matters as much as if one wins. True, sustainable value is not built on scorched earth. It is built on integrity, foresight, and partnerships, not on hostile destruction." He turned fully to the audience. "I'm afraid the cost of this victory will far outweigh the price we paid." It was a complete and utter repudiation. He wasn't just criticizing the deal. He was dismantling the entire philosophy Julian had built his career on. He was calling him reckless and short-sighted in front of the entire industry. Elias then looked directly at Julian, a flash of something unreadable in his eyes. He extended the crystal award. "Congratulations, Mr. Vance." Julian took the award. It felt as heavy as a tombstone. His hand shook. He walked back to his table, his face burning with humiliation. Serafina stared at him. Her expression was a mixture of fear and disgust. His value in her eyes was dropping in real time. The message was clear. His patron saint had excommunicated him. The ride home was silent and cold. Serafina sat as far away from him as possible. "So?" she finally said, her voice dripping ice. "Your ex-wife is dating the man who owns your company." "I didn't know," Julian said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You didn't know?" She let out a sharp, ugly laugh. "You, Julian Vance, the man who knows everything, who prides himself on having every angle covered, missed that. You told me she was a nobody, a sad little housewife, living in a pathetic apartment." "She was," he insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. "Clearly she wasn't," Serafina sneered. "My God, the humiliation. Everyone was looking at me. They weren't looking because they were jealous. They were pitying me." Julian had no answer. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that his career advantage was over. Elias Thorne hadn't needed to fire him. He had simply exposed him, and the system would do the rest. He would be sidelined until he had no choice but to resign. He thought of Clara's quiet expression. It wasn't triumphant. It was something far more devastating. It was indifference. She had stopped caring enough to even be an enemy. The ultimate power move was not revenge. It was the realization that the person who wronged you was now so small, so insignificant, that they were no longer worth the emotional energy. If Clara's indifference hit you hard, leave a emoji in the comments. Do you think Julian deserved it? Like and comment with your opinion. Chapter 4. The Path to Freedom. The consequences were swifter and more brutal than Julian Vance could have imagined. On the Monday after the gala, he walked into the Vantage offices, and the atmosphere was thick with his professional obituary. Robert Miles, his former champion, called him into his office. "Julian," Robert began, not even bothering to offer him a seat. "We'll have to restructure the leadership on the biogenetics integration. Given Mr. Thorne's feedback, we need a different approach, a more diplomatic touch." "You're taking my own deal away from me?" Julian asked, the words tasting like ash. "It's not your deal anymore, Julian. It's the firm's deal, and the firm needs to protect its relationship with its owner. Your other projects will be reassigned too. We need you to take a step back. Focus on internal strategy for a while." Internal strategy. The corporate equivalent of Siberia. They were putting him in the deep freeze, letting him wither until he took the hint and resigned. His life began to unravel. Serafina, seeing the wellspring of money and status about to dry up, packed her bags within a week. There was no tearful goodbye, just a cold note left on the marble kitchen island. "I can't be associated with this kind of failure. My lawyer will be in touch." She even took the muted painting Clara had left behind. He was alone in the sterile apartment, the silence now a crushing weight. A month after the gala, his phone rang. It was an unlisted number. "Hello?" he answered, his voice muted. "Julian, it's Clara." He froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I'm at our old coffee shop, the one near the university. I have something of yours. I'd like to return it." Her voice was even, uninflected. It was not a request. He found her at a small table in the back, a steaming mug in her hands. She looked at peace. He sat down, feeling like a supplicant. "I didn't plan any of this." "You know," she said quietly, looking into her mug. "I didn't know who Elias was in that way until a few weeks before the gala. I never set out to hurt you." "You could have warned me," he croaked. She finally looked up at him, and her eyes were clear and direct. "Why? So you could try to manipulate the situation? So you could try to use my relationship with him to your benefit? The Julian I knew would have. The man who told me I was a burden holding him back would have seen it as an opportunity." He winced. The truth of her words was a physical blow. "I'm not here to gloat," she continued. "I'm here because I'm finally closing this chapter of my life, and I want to do it without loose ends." She pushed a small velvet box across the table. He opened it. Inside was the simple, elegant engagement ring he had given her 15 years ago. "Elias is not a vengeful man, Julian," she said. "He's a builder. He takes no pleasure in tearing things down." What he said at the gala was a business assessment. It was his honest opinion of your work. It wasn't personal to him. It felt personal, Julian muttered. "I know," she said, a hint of sympathy in her voice. "Because to you, everything is personal. Your job, your money, your status. That's who you are. You never understood that for me, it was always about us, the partnership. When you ended that, you didn't just leave me. You erased the foundation of your own life. You've been in free fall ever since. You just didn't realize it." She stood up, pulling on her coat. "Elias has established a philanthropic arm of his company, the Thorn Foundation. He's asked me to head its new art and culture division. I'll be endowing museums, funding grants for young artists. The work I dreamed of doing when I was 20. She gave him one last, lingering look. It wasn't pity, but a kind of sad farewell. "Goodbye, Julian. I hope you find something real to build on next time." She turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving him alone with the ghosts of who they used to be and the ruin of what he had become. He looked at the ring, a perfect circle representing a promise he had broken. For the first time in his adult life, Julian Vance wept. He wept for the loss of the one thing of true value he had ever possessed, the love of a good woman. A year later, the world was a different place for both of them. Julian's exile was complete. His formal resignation from Vantage was an inevitability. He sold the penthouse to cover the mountain of debt Serafina's lifestyle had accrued. He eventually found a position 2 time zones away, in a city known for its modesty, not its ambition. He was now a senior analyst at a mid-market logistics firm, a company that moved real boxes, not abstract millions. His anonymity was absolute. At the grocery store, he was just a guy buying milk. At the office, he was just the new guy from out of town. The respect, the envy, the fear he had commanded were gone. Stripped of his title and his audience, he was forced to sit with the man who was left. He didn't like the company. Meanwhile, in a sunny office overlooking Central Park, Clara Bellwether Thorne signed the final grant of the quarter. Her new name, which she had adopted after a quiet wedding in the Tuscan countryside, felt less like a change and more like a realization. As director of the Art and Culture Division of the Thorn Foundation, Clara had become one of the most important figures in her field. She didn't just write checks. She built programs. She was literally rewriting art history, giving a voice to the silenced and bringing forgotten stories to light. Her quiet life had found its grand purpose. Her partnership with Elias was a study in serene balance. He sought her counsel not just on art, but on the human impact of his business ventures. One night, returning home from a gallery opening, Elias slipped his hand into her arm. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked softly. "Sometimes," she admitted, "only with sadness. I think of him as a character in a book I read a long time ago. A man who was so terrified of being ordinary that he never learned how to be truly extraordinary. He thought value was something you could put on a balance sheet." She leaned her head on his shoulder in peace. He never understood that the most valuable things in life are the ones that are priceless. And there you have it, the ultimate story of karmic justice. This was not about a woman seeking revenge. It was about a woman rediscovering her immense worth, while the man who discarded her learned the brutal difference between price and value. Julian Vance chased the empty, glittering prizes of the world, only to discover that the true treasure was the person he left behind. Clara's victory was realizing she was never meant to be a player in his game. She was the owner of a completely different game, one played with integrity, passion, and grace. If you loved this story of vindication, and the powerful truth that a person's worth is never defined by another's opinion. Be sure to hit like and tell us your favorite moment in the comments below. What do you think is next for Julian Vance? Do you think he'll manage to build something meaningful? Don't move. If you believe a man can truly change, hit like right now and subscribe to the channel to see if Julian Vance has finally learned his life's lesson. Chapter 5. The price of redemption. More than 2 years have passed since the fateful gala night. Julian Vance's life is now measured in painful mediocrity. He no longer gazes at the shimmering New York skyline, but at the fire escape of a low-rise apartment building in a modest town. He works at a logistics company where numbers are reality, not illusion. Solitude is no longer a punishment. It is a mirror. He is forced to face himself unadorned, and for the first time, he sees the emptiness. He no longer grieved for the loss of money or power. He grieved for the loss of his true worth. The velvet box containing his old engagement ring still sat on his coffee table, a physical testament to the promise he had broken. It was the only thing left from his former marriage that he hadn't sold, a letter of regret. Julian knew that to truly move on, he needed one last thing. Not forgiveness, but a confession to the person he had hurt the most. He wrote a letter. Not an email or an instant message, but a handwritten note on plain paper. He sent it not to Elias Thorne's office, nor to Clara's home address, but to the Thorne Foundation, of which Clara was now the director. The letter contained only 2 sentences. I want to return one last favor. I ask for only 20 minutes of your time, not for a job, but for closure. A few weeks later, his phone rang. This is the Thorne Foundation office. Mr. Thorne will meet you at the Foundation Cafe this Thursday at 10 a.m. exactly 20 minutes. Julian's heart pounded. He knew this was his only chance to shed the heaviest stone in his heart. The cold confrontation. The Thorne Foundation Cafe was on the ground floor of a historic building, where light flooded the walls adorned with young artists' work. It was a warm space, a stark contrast to the frigidity of Vantage Capital. Elias Thorne was already waiting. He wore a simple linen shirt, and the calm that emanated from him made Julian feel small. Not because Elias was rich, but because he was at peace. Thank you for coming, Vance, Elias said in a professional, unemotional tone. Ms. Thorne asked me to see you. I have 20 minutes. Julian did not sit directly across. He sat slightly angled, a gesture of submission. I didn't come to ask for a job or for my properties back, Julian began, his voice rough with tension. I know I ruined my career. I accept it. I came to return something. He placed the velvet box on the table and slid it to Elias. This is the engagement ring. I told Clara to sell it, but she returned it. That was the promise I broke. I wanted you to know that I kept it for 2 years as a reminder. Now, I return it to the man she chose. I give it to you. Elias looked at the box, then at Julian. Why didn't you mail it? Because you are the truth I can't unsee, Julian replied, looking him straight in the eyes. You saw Clara not just as a woman, but as a partner. You saw her value in the gallery, while I only saw it in my living room. I need to say this in front of the man who taught me that lesson. You didn't take revenge on me. You just judged my work, and I failed. Just as the clock struck 10, the door opened. Clara Bellwether Thorne entered. She wore a light, elegant suit. She saw Julian and caught her breath. She didn't expect him there, or at least she pretended not to. Elias, she said, her voice a little tight. Are you finished? No, Elias replied, nodding toward Julian. He just returned the ring. Clara walked closer, her gaze sweeping over the ring, and then settling on Julian. She felt no hatred, only weariness and a distant compassion. You said you returned everything, Clara said quietly. So what else do you want, Julian? Interactive. Question: if you were Clara after finding happiness, would you forgive Julian and forget it? Or would you keep his repentance as a lesson for the future? Leave your opinion in the comments. Redemption and closure. Julian looked at Clara, the woman he had called static. Now she was the source of an empire of art and charity. I have not come to ask for forgiveness, Julian said, his voice sincere, without a trace of fakery. I know I caused great harm. I have come to say, you were right. You are not a burden. It is I who lacks ambition. Greatness is not the money I make, but the purpose I destroy. He stared at the ring. This ring was once a symbol of possession. I return it to tell you, you are free. You have been since the day you left. I have learned that lesson. I am no longer a shark. I am a small fish trying to learn how to swim without biting. He stood up. That is the last favor I want to return. Good luck to you both. Julian gave them a slight bow and turned to leave. Clara did not say a word until the cafe door closed. She looked at Elias and then picked up the velvet box. Do you think he means it? Elias shrugged with his characteristic serenity. It doesn't matter, my love. He came here to free himself. His salvation is not our concern. Clara looked at the ring. Then she looked out the window where Julian was walking down the street. A completely ordinary man among the crowd. She opened the box, took out the ring, and dropped it into the paper cup Julian had just used. Its value is his lesson, she said. It is not my property. She turned to Elias, who was looking at her with love in his eyes. Let's get back to our work. Clara and Elias left the cafe, leaving the ring on the table. It was a relic, the symbol of a broken promise, a fallen kingdom, and a lesson learned at a high price. Clara's forgiveness was not a word. It was an act of letting go. She did not choose vengeance. She chose to grow. Julian got what he wanted. The acknowledgement that her better life was not a coincidence, but a direct consequence of her hidden greatness, which he, being too blind, failed to see. The confrontation was finally over. Julian has paid his debt. Clara has regained her peace. The lesson is not that the discarded woman wins, but that a man loses everything when he misjudges the one person who truly loves him. If Clara's decision to let go of the past feels like the true act of strength to you, don't forget to subscribe and tell us in the comments what you think Julian will do with his life now that he has found closure. Chapter 6. The Invisible Sabotage. Julian Vance's ending did not mark peace, but the beginning of a new war. A silent, cold war, fought not with blacksmith hammers, but with legal documents and figures. Clara Bellwether Thorne, as the director of the Art and Culture Division of the Thorne Foundation, had become an influential figure. Her latest and most ambitious project was the Velada Grant, a fund for marginalized and older artists, named in honor of the silenced women in art history. The project drew the attention of collectors and critics, but also of enemies. One Monday morning, in her sunny New York office, the atmosphere was broken. Robert Miles, the former CEO of Vantage Capital, who, after Julian's scandal, was discreetly forced to resign. He had been named director of a powerful venture capital firm competing for the same spheres of influence. His goal? To discredit Clara. The smear campaign. The attack began subtly. First, on specialized art social networks, anonymous profiles emerged questioning Clara's practical experience, insinuating that her position was merely a wife's ornament for Mr. Thorne. Then, the Velada Grant received a direct blow. Clara discovered that a major anonymous patron had withdrawn from the grant at the last minute, pulling a critical fund for the project. The patron's director offered no explanation, just a dry message. Strategic changes. Clara felt the familiar chill of old corporate New York. It was not a battle of egos. It was an invisible sabotage, designed to make her fail in the place where she felt strongest. Her purpose. "They're trying to make me drown in my own passion," Clara told Elias one night, while reviewing documents in the penthouse. Elias was silent, observing the statements. "This is not a coincidence, my love. The firm that bought the anonymous patronage belongs to a network controlled by Miles. He doesn't want you to fail. He wants you to be seen as Thorn Global's weakness." Clara straightened up. There was a dangerous glint in her eyes. "They are wrong. I am no longer anyone's weakness." The curator's counterattack. The following week, the sabotage escalated. A prestigious gallery canceled a vital exhibition for one of the foundation's beneficiary artists, citing doubts about the quality of the curatorship. The message was clear. Clara Bellwether's signature is unreliable. Elias wanted to intervene with his financial power, annihilating Miles with a call or an acquisition. "No, Elias," Clara said, holding his hand. "You are not going to use the money. Julian taught me that brute force only creates ash. I have to win this using my value, not yours. I have the eye. I have the story." Clara devised a plan that demonstrated her deep knowledge of art and ego. She focused on the canceled exhibition. She knew the gallery had canceled because Robert Miles, through his influence, had promised that gallery an invaluable piece of art that Elias privately owned. A Goya sketch. Clara confronted the gallery director. "I know you canceled our exhibition because Mr. Miles promised you he would mediate for you to get the Goya sketch from Thorn Global." The director paled. "How do you know?" "Because I am the only person who can authorize the sale or loan of Mr. Thorn's private collection. And I assure you, I will not do it." "But then," Clara smiled, "however, I can offer you something more valuable than a piece for sale. I offer you something for history." Key question. If you were Clara, what would you offer the gallery director to reverse Miles's sabotage? Something worth more than the Goya sketch? Think like a curator and comment. The value of history. Clara's trick was simple and brilliant. She understood that the art elite not only wanted possession, they also wanted legitimacy. Instead of the Goya, Clara offered the gallery an exclusive temporary co-exhibition of 5 masterpieces from Elias Thorn's private collection, pieces that had never before been seen by the public. With one condition. The gallery had to reinstate the marginalized artists' exhibition, giving it the place of honor and an opening with Elias and Clara present. The director, with the prospect of a world exclusive of the Thorn collection and the guarantee of legitimacy that Elias's presence entailed, immediately accepted. Prestige trumped money. Robert Miles was publicly humiliated. His attempt to sabotage Clara not only failed, but inadvertently propelled the Thorn Foundation to the forefront of the New York art scene. The rumor spread, "Never challenge Thorn's wife. She doesn't use money. She uses art to kill you." The invisible sabotage had become visible, and Clara had won using her true strength, the ability to see the soul of things. That night, Elias embraced Clara in their penthouse. "You did it. You won." "I won on my own terms," she said, snuggling into him. "I am no longer the woman Julian called static. I am the woman who chooses the stories that are told." The invisible sabotage had confirmed the final choice. Clara's worth lay not in being a man's accessory, but in being the engine of a legacy. And in their world, the story she chose to tell about herself was the most invincible of all. If you think Clara deserves this triumph, comment with the word legend, and don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter of the saga. Chapter 7. The Shadow of the Family. After the fiasco of the invisible sabotage orchestrated by Robert Miles, Clara's reputation as a manager and curator soared. The Thorn Foundation became the benchmark for legitimacy in art, and Clara and Elias formed a powerful duo, combining philanthropic vision with unshakable financial backing. However, In the world of the Thorns, Elias's greatness was, paradoxically, an offense. Elias was not a Thorn by birth. He was a Julian, retaining the original surname Logic, the adopted son and heir of Doña Isabella Thorn, the matriarch of the family fortune, who had passed away years ago. His success with Thorn Global and his choice to marry Clara, a foreigner without noble lineage and with a turbulent media past, was seen by his cousins and uncles as a moral and financial danger. The Thorn family, controllers of old trusts and minority shareholders in Elias's network, feared that Clara, with her passion for disadvantaged art, would divert the fortune toward eccentric causes. The Christmas blackmail. The attack arrived with the subtlety of a telegram. At the annual Christmas Eve dinner, held at the gigantic family estate in the Hamptons, the atmosphere was colder than the outside air. Don Elias Thorn, the eldest cousin and the family's main lawyer, spoke up. "Elias, dear, we are impressed with Thorn Global's performance," Don Elias said, with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "But the foundation worries us." Clara felt the tension at the table. The heads of the cousins turned, observing her as if she were a piece of tacky exhibition. "The foundation is thriving, Elias," Elias replied, with his usual calm tone. "We have tripled the beneficiaries this year." "Yes, the beneficiaries," his wife, Teresa Ina, intervened. "But at what price? We have noticed that your wife, Clara, has requested the release of an old trust created by your mother, Isabella, originally intended for the preservation of religious artworks for the Hamptons diocese." Clara intervened, her voice clear as crystal. "That trust is unused. The Velada grant better fulfills Doña Isabella's spirit, helping the creative souls that the church ignores." Don Elias dropped the bomb, lowering his voice to a threatening whisper that only the main table could hear. "Either you return the trust for its original purpose," Elias said, sliding a folder toward Elias, "or we will publish an audit report detailing minor fiscal irregularities from a decade ago in the foundation. Irregularities that are not serious, but that, placed in the hands of the press, will destroy Clara's reputation and paralyze all her projects." The blackmail was direct. The peace of the foundation and Clara's reputation in exchange for Isabella's money. Interactive question. Should Elias use his power and influence to crush the family, as the old Julian Vance would have done? Or should Clara, with her new ethics, find a way to neutralize the blackmail without destroying Elias's family? Vote and comment with your opinion. Isabella's hidden legacy. Elias looked at Clara. She returned not a look of panic, but one of unshakable confidence. "No, Elias," Elias said. "We will not yield to blackmail. Clara has brought decency back to this family." Elias smiled smugly. "Too bad. Get ready for the scandal then." Elias did not get up to fight. He waited. He remembered the words of his adoptive mother, Isabella, a woman who had always hated the greed of her own blood. The next day, Elias and Clara went to the house of Doña Isabella's personal lawyer, an elderly man named Don Miguel. "My mother always told me that if the family tried to control me, I had a key," Elias said. Don Miguel sighed and opened a safe. Inside there was no money, but a single document. An addendum to Isabella Thorn's will, handwritten and signed one day before her death. The addendum revealed that Doña Isabella had foreseen exactly the behavior of her greedy relatives. It stipulated that if, at any time, any member of the Thorn family tried to obstruct or sabotage Elias's philanthropic work, 50% of the family's minority shares in Thorn Global, which gave them veto power, would be immediately transferred to a trust fund called the Julian Fund, which only Elias and his wife, Clara, could control. The shadow of the family was, in fact, the protective shadow of the mother, the triumph of integrity. Elias and Clara called an emergency meeting with Don Elias and the family council. Elias began, brandishing the audit report. Either you give us the trust, or tomorrow, Clara Bellwether's reputation will be fodder for the press. Elias slid Isabella's addendum across the table. Dear Elias said, copying his cousin's cold, distant tone. My mother left this for you and your accomplices. If you publish a single word about my wife's accounts, this addendum is activated. Tomorrow morning, you will lose your voting rights in Thorn Global and most of your capital. The Thorn Foundation will continue to operate, but Thorn Global will be permanently out of your reach. Don Elias's face fell apart. He had used blackmail. Elias had used the law. Mom never trusted you, Elias whispered, not with hatred, but with pity. She taught me that integrity is the only inheritance worth protecting. Elias and the council withdrew in silence, defeat etched on their pale faces. The audit report was burned in the estate's fireplace without a single line being published. Clara and Elias returned to New York that same night, leaving the poison of greed behind. The love and loyalty they shared had overcome not only Julian's past, but also the toxic shadow of the Thorn family. They had shown that in their relationship and in their empire, there was no weakness, only ethical strength. If you think Doña Isabella's wisdom saved the day, comment with the word Isabella. And don't forget to subscribe for the end of this saga. 3 years had passed. Clara Bellwether Thorn was at the peak of her career, sitting in the same penthouse that once seemed to her the headquarters of a ghost. Now it was her home, and the center of a love forged in honesty. The Thorn Foundation had doubled its impact. She had achieved what Julian Vance never could, turn money into meaning and power into goodness. Elias and she were inseparable. Their power was not loud. It was the silent certainty that both had chosen each other for who they were and not for what they possessed. The last message of a ghost. In his quiet life, Julian Vance, mid-market logistics, had learned to coexist with solitude. It was no longer a hell, but a blank canvas. One day, while he was in his modest apartment, he received a package in the mail. It had no sender. Inside, he found an old art book, a catalog of the Met that Clara had treasured in her student days. It was dedicated inside, to the one who finds value in the priceless. The handwriting was Clara's, but the dedication was signed by Elias Thorn, and next to the book, an envelope. Inside, a single check. It was not for him. It was an anonymous endowment in the name of a small local gallery in his current city, a place Julian sometimes visited. It was a check in the name of his new self, the man who appreciated art for beauty, not for investment. The message was not a mockery, nor a job offer. It was a liberation. Clara, through Elias, was telling him that the debt was paid, not with money, but with the acceptance of his new identity. Julian, the man who once scorned contentment, felt an unexpected peace. There was no complete redemption, but there was closure. His life was still humble, but for the first time, it was his own. He looked at the check, tore it up, and threw it in the trash. He knew that his worth did not lie in another's money. The curator's reflection. Clara, unaware of the check's destruction, was in her office, looking at a Vermeer she had acquired for the foundation. It was a quiet painting, focused on light and everyday life. Julian never understood this painting, she told Elias, who came in with a coffee. He thought the light was a trick. He always looked for the price of things. And you looked for the value, Elias said, kissing her forehead. My biggest victory, Clara reflected, holding her husband's coffee, was realizing that the world I lost with him was not a kingdom, but a golden cage. and my supposed lack of drive was actually my inner peace, waiting for the right soil to grow. The story of Julian Vance ended in solitude, but with a lesson learned. The story of Clara Bellwether Thorne ended in light, with unshakable purpose. The true triumph was not karmic revenge, but clarity. Clara did not become Julian's enemy. She became the measure of his own life, the yardstick by which he measured his fall and his slow but meaningful rebuilding. And so concludes our saga. This story reminds us that the true measure of a man is not his wealth or his power, but what he chooses to build after losing everything. The real value of a person is not in the price the world puts on them, but in the peace they find in their own soul. Thank you for following the saga to the end. Comment with the word "the end" to close this book and tell us what saga you want us to write next. Interactive question. If you believe a man can truly change, hit like right now and subscribe to the channel to see if Julian Vance has finally learned his life's lesson.